Hicks Creates here, coming at you with lesson number 12 of my Basics of Cross Stitch series. I do believe this is going to be the last one. Today's video is just going to be kind of a compilation of questions that I've gotten, several odds and ends tips that didn't really fit in anywhere else but aren't long enough to do a video. So yeah, I'm just going to compile a bunch of different stuff here. I think 12, a nice round dozen, is a good place to stop. I've pretty much covered everything on my list. After today, I will have. So yeah, I think this is going to be it for my Basics of Cross Stitch series. Please don't hesitate though if you have other questions, if you want me to show you something. I can always do more videos, inserted in another video, a Stitch With Me video that I'm doing, that kind of thing. So I'm always here to help, always here to answer your questions. But as far as the kind of very structured Basics of Cross Stitch videos, I think this is going to be it. Today, let's see. I have my list down here. Let's see if I can read it from a distance. This is a test. I'm going to show you how to frog. Quick way, slow way, which is better when. I'm going to talk about whether hoops, frames, Qsnaps, when is there such a thing as one being good as better than the other, and a better time to use one over the other, or stitching in hand. We're going to talk about when to start in the middle, when to start your chart on the edges, if that's something you're interested in doing. Let's see. We're going to talk about fractional stitches, what they look like on a chart, and how you actually stitch them. So, as always, I am going to flip you around so you're looking down at my work table, and we will get started. All right, so we are going to start with frogging. What does frogging look like? How do you do it? When do you do it? And quicker ways and slower ways. And let me get a needle handy here. All right, so once again, pulling out my good old piece of Aida that has seen me through the entire series. So we're going to actually frog one of these. We're going to do, well, I'm going to frog multiple pieces here. When do you frog? The rule of thumb would be, for me, and everybody is different. Everybody has different levels of perfection and tolerance of what they can handle as far as a mistake is concerned. My rule of thumb is, if I look at it and I can't tell, and it's not going to make a difference to the rest of the design, I'll leave it. Now, how often does that happen? Pretty much all the time in full coverage pieces, because one stitch in the midst of all of those stitches usually isn't going to matter. If you're working on a geometric piece, however, or say you're working on a motif on a sampler and you're off by one stitch is wrong, a color's wrong. If you're working like a basket and one color is wrong, I might not worry about it. But if you're off one stitch in either direction and it sets everything else off, I would probably fix that. Certainly a border, you know, if you have your border messed up, you're going to fix it. There's just some times when there's no getting around frogging. And as a cross stitcher, you might as well accept the fact that there are going to be times when you are going to have to take out stitches, and there's going to be times that you only have to take out a few stitches, and there's going to be times where you have to take out a lot of stitches. That's just part of the process here. So we are going to flip this over, and to begin with, I'm going to talk about just taking out a few stitches. Now, you look at the back of your work, and let's not work on this one with all the colors. Let's work on one that's a little less random to start with. So let's work on, get in the camera here, there we go. Let's work on this purple one. So the first thing I have to do is decide which thread I need to pull out. And that's often easier said than done, because I need to decide which one is my beginning thread and which one is my ending thread. You know, I have several starts and stops here, right? I have an end here, I have an end here. Oops, I just pulled that out. I can look at the front and think, okay, recall how you stitched it. Did I start up here? Did I start down there? Where is the end most likely to be? If I remember correctly, I worked down. So I am pretty sure, and let's just say for ease of use, I need to remove these 4 stitches down here. So I am pretty sure that this thread tucked in here is my end. So I need to carefully come in and pull that out. Now, I just remembered that this was the random block, so I don't really remember. I also realize I need to change glasses to my even closer up readers. So I don't know, I don't remember where my last stitch was on this block because this was my kind of random stitching around. But the way this looks, right, my thread is kind of in the middle here. I think I found the end. Let me pull this out from there. The end is going down here. Okay, so this kind of presents a conundrum. I want to take out these 4 stitches at the bottom, right? I decided I was taking out these 4, but I don't know where those 4 fall in the length of floss that I used. Such is life. So I look here and I can see that this thread is going down in this hole. So I'm just going to stick my needle in there, come back around, and start taking this out. Now, I do know that I did 1 stitch at a time, so I know I'm going to complete that stitch. I don't know where I went to next. Looking at the colors, it's probably because this is darker purple. It's probably one of these. Yep, there we go. Oftentimes I'll pull a little bit on the end to try and figure out where I came from, what the next one is I have to pull out. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it's a little bit too caught in the back to have much effect on the front. I think that one is coming from here. Nope. So sometimes you have to play hide and seek, or turn it over, right? That stitch is going down here. Let's see if I can decipher it from the back. There we go. Oh, see, that was coming from the whole way up here. I really jumped around on this one. So is that one? One of these. All right, where did that go? There it is. So yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of taking out to do to get down to that bottom. And at this point, I'm realizing I'm probably gonna be taking out most of it. So this is the slow way to do it. This is the way you do it if you only have a few stitches to take out. If you're taking out this many, and it's hard to decipher where you're going next, I recommend just taking out the whole block. And that may seem rather drastic, and maybe I'm getting down there now, but quite frankly, it's not worth my time to do it stitch by stitch like this. Now, and especially knowing that I'm not going to be reusing this thread. It's just so squiggly at this point. It's been sitting in here for a couple months now. Stitching with this again, it would constantly curl up on itself and knot like it does. So I will be using a new thread. If I had just finished stitching with this and then realized my mistake and was taking it out, I probably would reuse it because it wouldn't be this curly yet. But in this case, I'm not. So your options for taking out chunks. One of the biggest things, excuse me, one of the biggest things you need to be very careful about, of course, is putting a hole in your fabric when you're doing this. Now, I have these very sharp pointed scissors, and I could certainly use these. And when I'm doing a big chunk like this, I still usually just do a stitch at a time, just very carefully, making sure I'm keeping my scissors parallel with the fabric so I have no chance of digging down into the fabric. But you want to make sure if you're going to do this, you want to make sure you have very sharp scissors. What I find even better to use is a seam ripper. This is just a little tiny one that I keep. I have a little notions bag that I keep everything, all my little tools in. I do have a bigger one, but this one is handy. I can keep it in my bag and it can go with me everywhere. So that's my seam ripper. And I just feel like it has, for those that might not be familiar with the seam ripper, you can see it kind of has a beveled edge, so it can get underneath the threads and kind of glide under there, and there's less, and you keep it again parallel flat against the fabric, so there's less chance that you're going to get down in and pierce your fabric. And so this allows me to just slide along, and I usually just do like the top threads, and then I'll flip it over and do along the back and kind of pull them out that way. There's a siren going off. I don't know whether you can hear it, but hopefully it's not disturbing you. They're alerting everybody that I'm ripping stitches out. And then you just kind of pull out all of the loose threads. So I highly recommend you get, if you don't have one already, get a little seam ripper. Keep it in your kit. Comes in very handy. There's that long thread. I'm gonna snip that off. So, fast way, slow way to frog. With the knowledge that yes, at some point the frog comes, whoops, sorry about that. The frog comes and visits all of us. Now, at this point, because I have all these short ends hanging around here, I would have to take out this whole square. I couldn't leave this like this, right? You have to have your ends tucked in. So I would just be taking out the whole square at this point. May seem like overkill, but when you're dealing with the kind of, you know, wandering around thread that I had there, it's just the easier way to do it in the long run. And you will notice that the holes are a little bit opened up from having the thread in them for so long. But when you redo the piece, you're not going to notice that. You know, your threads are going to cover all that up. So, the ins and outs of frogging. Next on the agenda, when to start in the middle and when to start in a corner. Traditionally, we start, most designers, most charts are set up to start in the middle. Pretty much any chart you get out there, except for full coverage, is going to have the markings that show you the middle of the chart. And there's a lot of people that only start in the middle, and that's fine. You know, again, it's all a choice of what we are comfortable with. I'm pretty much a rebel in all things, and so I only start in the middle if there is no clear edge to help me pinpoint where the edge is. Even if I have a chart that, let's see if I have one around here handy that I can show you. You'd think with all of the starts I'm doing, here, let me pull this one. Even with this one, you look and you say, well, there's not really a strong edge here or here, but down here, I have this nice long piece here. I would be starting down here on this one. I very, very rarely start in the middle. I just find it easier to pick up and go and start than I do folding the fabric in half and marking it and, you know, all of that. It's just easier for me. Is there one particular corner you need to start in? Absolutely not. I do have a tendency to start in the upper left, and I think that's totally because as an English reader, as an English speaker, you know, we're reading left to right, and so it seems natural to me to start here. But as you can see, I started at the bottom. This is the Jane Marshall sampler. I started at the bottom of this one because I wanted to do this band first. Again, there are no rules that say you always have to start in the middle, or you always have to start here, or you always have to start there. No rules at all. Whatever you feel like doing, basically. Now, one thing I would caution you about is to make sure if you are starting, you know, the main reason we start in the middle of the fabric is to make sure that we have enough, right? We're working out from the center. And if we've done all of our measurements correctly with figuring out how much fabric we need, then we should end up so that we have whatever margin, whatever border, whatever length we need for the framing. So that is one risk you take with starting on the edge. Now, another gadget that is very handy. I got this at StitchCon last year, as you can see. So this is telling me this is 2 inches from the edge. This is 2.5 inches from the corner. So, you know, this way and this way, 2.5 inches and 3 inches. So if I've decided that I want to start in 2 inches, then I lay this at the corner. See if I can get you on screen here. And I put my needle down in there. I actually usually use a pin and stick that down in there, and that's marking that 2-inch mark. Again, 2.5 inches, 3 inches. I decide what I want my margin to be, and I stick a pin down in there. And that tells me, you know, if I've done my figuring correctly and I've left 3 inches extra on each side, that's where I should start if I'm starting in the bottom left corner. This one I started over further. I knew I had more than enough fabric to do this piece, so I just started in, and you can see I have more than enough fabric on each side. So that leads me to how much fabric do you leave? How do you know when 2 inches is enough, 3 inches is enough? Again, traditionally, most patterns say leave 3 inches. I very, very rarely leave 3 inches. The idea is that you are leaving 2 inches for framing and another inch to have a border around your piece out from the frame. So, you know, have an inch of the fabric showing before the frame starts. I think all that space also was to allow for mats if you were doing any matting of your piece. We don't do as much matting now as we used to in the 80s and 90s. So that's something that you consider before you start. The way I usually make my decision, and I can't believe I don't have more patterns here. Hold on one second. The way I make my decision on how much fabric I want to leave between the finished design and the frame is to look at the sample picture and decide if I like that look. So in this one, she's left about 1/2 inch around, And I certainly wouldn't leave any more than that. This one. On the big one, she has a lot of matting, but she hasn't left any space between the mat and the finished design. The smaller one, she does have some space. I would have to decide what I liked better. This one, she has the inner frame and the outer frame, but that's butted right up against the stitching. And that's what I would do too. So I wouldn't need any extra fabric for the border of the stitching itself. This one leaves about 1 inch. This creates actually a very nice airy feeling to this, and I think that complements the whole design. So whereas I don't usually leave that much space, I do like the way that looks. But if you'll notice, up here at the top, there's less space than there is on the sides. I don't know whether that was a designer choice or whether she just didn't have enough fabric. So it's that kind of thing you need to look at and decide when you are deciding how much fabric you want. Many times I have more than enough fabric, so I'll measure 3 in, 2 in, 2.5. I very rarely leave 3. It just happened to work out this way because I knew I had plenty of fabric, and so I just kind of started it, and I knew I was 3 in one way. I'm 3 in from the bottom. But yeah, I'm probably not going to be leaving a lot of fabric showing when I frame this. So I have a lot of extra fabric here. But that's the kind of things you want to think about. How much fabric you want to have showing, if you're going to mat it, and to decide how much fabric you need, how much extra fabric you need. And if you know you're going to have plenty of fabric, you may not even want to measure at all. Just start on a corner and start stitching, which is basically what I did here. And it worked. I'm not advocating not measuring though. I'm not advocating not keeping track. That would be bad. All right, so that is that. Next question, when to use Qsnaps, when to use frames, when to use hoops. Is there a preferred time for any of those, one over the other? And I would say no. Again, no rules. As you know, I mostly stitch in hand, but there are times that I'm using frames and Qsnaps. I do use Qsnaps for my full coverage pieces. I like the fact that I can gather all that extra fabric up in a grime guard around the Qsnap. I have my English garden piece on a scroll frame because I just like the idea of having it nice and flat and neat. I mean, there's really no rhyme or reason to my thinking sometimes. But for the most part, I stitch in hand. I would suggest if you are just starting out and you don't really know what the difference is or how they feel, get a hoop, get a cheap Qsnap, get a cheap scroll frame, and try them out. Now, a scroll frame isn't the easiest thing to use if you don't have a stand to hold it, but you certainly can. I've used it just propped up on my knees in the past. But give them all a try and see, because it really is going to be specific to you and your likes, how you sit, how you stitch, as to what works best for you. And maybe you'll like the sewing method. I prefer the sewing method because I can just pick it up and start stitching. I don't have to set up any sort of frame. I also don't have to worry about my hand getting tired. Oftentimes people complain about their hand getting tired holding a Qsnap or a hoop. I don't have to worry about that. My hand doesn't usually get tired just holding the fabric. So yeah, that's, that kind of question is totally personal, and I recommend trying the different ones when you can. And if you don't want to buy it, if you have a cross-stitch shop nearby, Go and pick them up and play with them and try them. See if the shop would mind if you know, if they happen to have a project, or go on a stitching night and see if people would mind if you, you know, just kind of hold their project and see how it feels in your hands. Okay. I wanted to, I don't think I mentioned this. I don't remember. When we were talking about changing up your fabrics and your flosses in a kit when you're kitting things up, one of the great ways I have found to test floss on a fabric and to see if it works is to make little swatches and see if they look good together, if you're changing the floss, and if they look good on that fabric. Just little swatches, no bigger than this, to give you a feel for what it all looks like together. Let's see. Okay. How to read a chart with fractional stitches and how to do fractional stitches is next on our agenda. So fractional stitches, I would say, are not used very often in today's cross stitch. I looked through quite a few of my patterns, by no means an exhaustive search, but my more recent patterns, and I did not see any fractional stitches. For the most part, designers today will make your stitches, your full stitches, and then they create any curved lines that they want, either just with the stitches themselves or with back stitching. In the past, and I even looked at some patterns from the 1990s and did not see any fractional stitches. So I would say you're not going to come across them very often in more recent patterns, but they certainly were out there a lot in the older patterns. Now, I pulled out one of my old stocking patterns, and I am going to show you the chart, but it's just going to be a little piece of it. So you can see here along this edge fractional stitches, and these, all of these along here, have half of the stitch being one color, half being the other color, and then finished with the back stitch. That's what all of these are. So you have the black dot, you have the kind of hourglass on its side, and then the red line is the back stitch. So what that looks like in stitching, and I'm not going to use two different colors for this. So I have this section here all stitched, and I am going to, in this square right here, I'm going to do fractional stitches. So on Aida, what that looks like, and it is a little bit more difficult, and my needle is, this is a size 24, and it is a bit blunt, but on Aida, you have to split your square in half. And yes, it can be a pain, because like I said, this needle is a bit blunt. So there, I've gone down in the center of that square. Now, on this chart, it is two different colors, but I'm just going to come up here and use the same color. And you will see in older charts the same color split like this, with the back stitching going in between to differentiate them. Today you would just see a full stitch with possibly with back stitch, possibly with not. But again, the back stitch is going to come slanted across that hole there, so you're not going to see that kind of messy joining of where those two half stitches are. And your chart could just as easily have the half stitches going the other way with the back stitch going that way. I mean, however it looks on the chart is exactly how you're going to stitch it. Half one color, half the other color. and then finished with the back stitch. You don't finish, you don't do anything more than this when you're stitching fractional stitches. All right, so let me show you what that looks like on linen. This is 40 count linen. So I've changed needles. I've taken it down to 1 thread. And I'm just going to do it on my Jane Marshall sampler. Because it's a sampler, that's what it's meant for. Testing and sampling and learning, right? Now I'm just going to put in a few stitches here to start with, just to give us kind of the same base to work with that we had on the Aida. And yeah, that's a lot harder to see than the 14 count Aida. Even with my extra magnification reading glasses. All right, so there's our little square, almost finished square. So again, come up in the upper right, but instead of having to pierce the middle of a square of fabric, I have a hole there. So that just goes down right there. Easy peasy, little tiny stitch. It's basically like stitching over 1 on 40 count fabric, which is always so much fun. The first stitch kind of is getting lost. We're going to tug him back out a bit. Come here, you. All right, so that is what doing fractional stitches on linen looks like. And again, the back stitch would just come down in the middle of that and complete the stitch, complete the X. Okay, that's all fractional stitches are. You will at times have just like, say, this bottom one here. You wouldn't have this top right one. You'll just have this one with the back stitch coming down. And in that case, again, you wouldn't see, let me see if I can find one on here. Down here, stop shaking camera, you just have the one corner that you would stitch. Wouldn't do anything else in that square until you do the back stitching. Okay, easy peasy. All right, the only other thing I had for you today was talking about equivalence between Aida and linen and even weave, all of those things. So I got a question about 14 count Aida and what the linen equivalent is, and of course it is 28 count linen. And I say of course because anytime you have your Aida count, multiply it by 2, and you have your linen, the word's not coming, linen even weave count. So how do you determine, if you don't have the label for your fabric, how do you determine what count it is? The easiest way, or I would say with the way that you can do it without any, I think I showed this in the linen video, but just in case, the easiest way is to get your ruler, get a pin, and just count how many threads are in an inch. Now I usually just count to a 1/2 inch and multiply it by 2. So 40 count, this should be 20 threads in here. And I usually do it in multiple places just to double check my counting, because I have been known to miscount. Now they do have gadgets out there to help with this. This one is called the cross stitch gauge. It's from Yarn Tree. This is available on 123 Stitch. And the idea with this is that you would lay it on your fabric. Let me get it here. You would lay it on your fabric and line it up with the threads of the fabric. And by that, line up these little hash marks with the threads of the fabric. And by that, you can tell whether it is, you know, which count it is. It sounds good hypothetically. In linen, it isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially when you get into the higher counts, because it's hard to eyeball, especially as your eyes start to get older. It's hard to eyeball whether you have things lined up correctly, and then you add in the different slubs, thick and thin linen threads, and it just gets to the point where I'd rather just count it. But this particular thing, ruler, so let's come over here to the 14 count, and this will be a little easier because it's bigger, right? So you can see for 14 count, each of these hash marks lines up with the holes. So on the bigger counts, that's certainly easy enough. And then if you look, so I have 14 count here. On the back where the 14 count is, I have the 28 count. So 14 and 28 are the same. 32, I flip it over. Well, okay, so I guess there isn't a 15 count. So 30 on the top here, 32 here, you flip it over, there's not really a 15 count aida. You have 16 and 18, so they proved a liar out of me. I was hoping it would all line up, but it doesn't. 22 and 25 count on this side, 36 and 40. So it has all of the most popular counts of fabric that you're going to find out there. So it is very handy for the lower counts. I don't think I've ever tried to do 40 and 36 anyway. I think the highest fabric that I tried to figure out was 32 with this. And I don't think my eyes could even handle looking at that. I still had to count it to, I think I was pretty sure with the 32 that that's what I was looking at, but I still had to count it to be double sure because that's just how I am. All right, guys, that is all I have for you today. Again, if you have any questions about anything else, let me know. If I need to do another video, I am happy to. But for now, this ends my Basics of Cross Stitch series. I hope you got a lot out of it. I certainly enjoyed sharing this time with you and sharing whatever knowledge I could. As I've always said, I am no expert. I do know a lot. I've been stitching for many years, but I am certainly not an expert. But I am happy to share with you whatever knowledge I have gained over the years, and also just my own personal preferences, if that's something that you find useful. So, I hope to see you. I hope you have subscribed to me over the course of this series. If not, I invite you to do so. I do floss tube videos and stitch with me videos all the time. I am in the series of a stitch with me, start a new project every day, because I'm just insane. So if you would like to join me with that, I invite you to do so. Until next time, guys, I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.